The concept of time changes dramatically over the course of civilization. As we cover different periods, we are given new definitions to the meaning of time for people of that particular era. The cultural rebirth of Europe, known as the Renaissance, changed the concept of time considerably. In the Middle Ages, time belonged to God. As we transition to the Renaissance, the concept of time becomes less about God and more about furthering one's own self-interest. The Baroque man devotes his earthly life and time to God in the hopes of achieving eternal life in heaven, while the Renaissance man realizes that the short life in which we live must be filled with a purpose, otherwise we fail.
Time was cyclical. That is, it was not based on units of measurement such as minutes or hours, but rather on cycles of time, such as day into night or the seasons. It also belonged to God. Therefore, when merchants charged interest on loans, they were selling what did not belong to them. Church time conflicted with merchant time during the Middle Ages. Merchant time, however, was based on units of measurement, such as seconds or minutes or hours, and it belonged to man. Therefore, the focus was on personal gain. The focus during this time was shifted to the self rather than God. We can see the shifting view of time and how it altered Italian art in the following examples.
When focusing on the center picture, we see agriculture dominating the use of cyclical time. That was very important during the Middle Ages. In this picture, it is clear that the art that we see has been patronized by the church. It shows a lack of perspective and a large use of gold, which symbolizes the power of God. The ultimate destiny of the people who lived in the Middle Ages was to get to heaven. So when looking at this art, we see how important the role of the church played in the lives of the people. In this picture, we see Dante's Inferno, which also had a very large role that played in religion. We also see how it's shaped cyclically, which was a very important concept for time during the Middle Ages. As we move into medieval sculpture, we can see clearly that it's all centered around God once again. This is because A, it has been patronized by the church, and secondly, the only thing people really thought about back then was what was going to happen after they died. As we move to architecture, we can see a clock above. However, below it also are symbols of religion. This also meant that even when looking at clocks, people still only thought about what their ultimate destiny would be after they had passed. Further examples are included with the clock tower above the chapel with Jesus Christ crucified underneath, as well as the sculpture by Giovanni Pisano, which is also including Jesus being crucified with many people looking onward.
In Botticelli's painting, The Birth of Venus, we see much more use of perspective. Venus is the main focus of the piece, and we also see the use of oil paint and brighter colors. When Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, he depicted a man reaching out for God. The painting focuses on the perfection of man. In the Middle Ages, your body belonged to God. And now, as we move into the Renaissance, we begin to move into thinking more about ourselves. Da Vinci's The Vitruvian Man was a much more secular concept. It focused primarily on man and was devoid of God. The Renaissance was a time of self-idealization. People started to focus more on themselves as opposed to God and religion. In The Prince, Niccolo Machiavelli focused on working to determine your own destiny. The prince moved away from the idea of dying and going to heaven. It mainly focused on going out on top. Another difference between medieval literature and Renaissance literature was that writing was no longer in Latin. Renaissance architecture incorporated rounded arches and fewer small details than Middle Age architecture. This Florence cathedral showcases the large dome style of Renaissance architecture. Renaissance architecture also focused on balance and form. In the Renaissance, sculpture had Greek and Roman classical influence. This statue of David is much more realistic than statues from the Middle Ages. Again, this statue depicts the perfection of man. There are no references to God, and David is portrayed as an individual.
Different aspects of paintings, architecture, literature, and sculptures, the differences between church time and merchant time become more apparent. The concept of time will continue to evolve throughout Italian civilization.